In today's digital world, APIs, or application programming interfaces, are the lifeblood that enables seamless communication between applications. Whether it's connecting your favorite apps, processing transactions, or fetching real-time data, APIs play a crucial role. However, as essential as APIs are to the digital ecosystem, they are also becoming a prime target for hackers. In this video, we're diving deep into API poisoning, a sophisticated attack method hackers use to exploit the vulnerabilities of APIs. But before we get into it, remember to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any updates on the latest cybersecurity threats and tips on how to stay safe online. Now, let's begin. What is API poisoning? First, let's define what API poisoning really is. In simple terms, API poisoning is a form of attack where malicious actors inject harmful data into an API, manipulating how it behaves and compromising the integrity of the systems that rely on it. APIs are designed to handle and process data efficiently, but if the input is compromised, it can lead to disastrous consequences, including unauthorized access, data theft, and even complete system shutdowns. Unlike other forms of cyberattacks that focus on breaching through firewalls or exploiting software vulnerabilities, API poisoning is all about manipulating the data input process. Think of it as feeding the wrong ingredients into a recipe. If the wrong data goes in, the API may malfunction, perform unintended actions, or provide access to sensitive information. This is why it's critical to understand how API poisoning works and what you can do to protect yourself from it. Why is API poisoning dangerous? Now, you might be asking yourself, why is this type of attack so dangerous? The simple answer, APIs are everywhere, and they often have direct access to sensitive data and functionalities. Whether it's in banking, healthcare, or social media applications, APIs facilitate the transfer of information across platforms. Poisoning an API doesn't just disrupt one app, it can compromise entire systems, leading to cascading failures. Imagine a financial API that processes payment transactions. If poisoned, hackers could manipulate transaction data, causing financial losses, or worse, gain unauthorized access to personal bank accounts. The ripple effect can be catastrophic, especially if the compromised API is part of a larger ecosystem where many other services rely on its data integrity. Another reason API poisoning is so dangerous is that it often goes undetected. Traditional security tools might miss these attacks because the API is functioning as designed. It's just receiving malicious data inputs that it wasn't programmed to handle. This is why hackers often turn to API poisoning. It's stealthy, effective, and can fly under the radar until it's too late. Now, let's dive into how API poisoning works. How does API poisoning work? At its core, API poisoning exploits the fact that many APIs are built to trust the data they receive. Hackers identify weaknesses in how the API processes input data and inject malicious payloads that can corrupt its functionality. There are several techniques hackers use to carry out API poisoning, and understanding these can help you recognize and prevent an attack. 1. Input manipulation. One of the most common methods is input manipulation, where hackers deliberately send unexpected or harmful data through an API. Many APIs are designed to accept different types of input. Think of search queries or form submissions. But if the API doesn't properly validate or sanitize that input, it can open the door to a wide range of exploits, including buffer overflows or SQL injection attacks. Malicious actors often exploit these weaknesses to take control of the system. 2. Buffer overflow attacks. In some cases, hackers send data that exceeds the API's memory limit, leading to a buffer overflow. When an API is overwhelmed with more data than it can handle, it can cause the application to crash or behave erratically. Worse, buffer overflow attacks can allow hackers to execute arbitrary code, giving them control over the system. Once in control, they can escalate privileges, steal sensitive information, or even take the entire application offline. 3. SQL and NoSQL injection. APIs that interface with databases are particularly vulnerable to SQL or NoSQL injection attacks. If an API doesn't properly validate its inputs, hackers can insert malicious queries that trick the database into executing unintended commands. For example, they might manipulate an API endpoint that retrieves user data to dump the entire database instead. This is especially dangerous when APIs handle personal or financial information. 4. Cross-site scripting, XSS, and cross-site request forgery, CSRF. In XSS attacks, Hackers inject malicious scripts into APIs that interact with user interfaces. This is commonly used to steal session tokens or inject malware into a user's browser. Meanwhile, CSRF attacks exploit the trust that APIs have in authenticated users. Hackers trick users into executing unwanted actions on APIs they are already logged into, making it appear as though the request is legitimate. If you're finding this information helpful so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's talk about some real-world examples of API poisoning in action. Real-world examples of API poisoning. Several high-profile incidents have shown just how devastating API poisoning can be. For instance, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal was largely the result of an API being exploited to siphon off personal data without user consent. By manipulating the Facebook API, malicious actors were able to gain access to private information that should have remained secure. Another example comes from the Uber breach of 2016, where hackers exploited a vulnerability in Uber's API to steal sensitive information from over 57 million users. This breach wasn't just a financial disaster, it also caused immense reputational damage, as users lost trust in Uber's ability to keep their data safe. These examples illustrate why API security should be a top priority for developers and organizations alike. Now, let's move on to how you can protect yourself and your systems from API poisoning. How to protect against API poisoning. There are several steps you can take to protect your systems from API poisoning. 1. Input validation and sanitization. The first line of defense is ensuring that all input data is validated and sanitized before it's processed by the API. This means rejecting unexpected input, filtering out malicious characters, and ensuring that data is of the correct type and length. By implementing strict input validation rules, you can significantly reduce the risk of poisoning attacks. 2. Rate limiting and throttling. Implementing rate limiting can help prevent attackers from overwhelming your API with malicious data. By restricting the number of requests an API can process within a given time frame, you can mitigate the risk of buffer overflow attacks or brute force attempts to manipulate the API. 3. Authentication and authorization. Another key defense is ensuring that your APIs are protected by robust authentication and authorization mechanisms. This includes using OAuth, API keys, or token-based authentication to ensure that only authorized users have access to sensitive endpoints. Make sure to use least privilege principles, where users and applications are only given access to the data and functions they absolutely need. 4. Logging and monitoring. Finally, implement logging and monitoring to detect unusual API behavior. By keeping an eye on traffic patterns and inputs, you can quickly identify and respond to poisoning attempts before they escalate into full-blown breaches. Remember, prevention is always better than cure. By taking these steps, you can safeguard your APIs from the dangers of poisoning attacks. Conclusion. API poisoning is a serious threat in today's digital landscape, but with the right security practices, it can be effectively mitigated. By understanding how hackers exploit APIs and taking proactive steps to protect your systems, you can reduce the risk of attacks and keep your data safe. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more insights on cybersecurity and hacking prevention. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.